year and a half, and it is an activity, it's an example of an activity that began in the AR standards community. So this organization, specifically George Percival, who you heard speak this morning, was one of the first people who said, you know, we're never going to make it out of the woods here. We have too many standards, too many different levels and viewpoints that were confusing when we talk about augmented reality. We need a common framework from which to speak. And that is what Don's going to be talking about. He is here on behalf of Marius Preda and the ad hoc group, which he'll tell you about in just a minute.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for the opportunity to be here. They say love is never having to say you're sorry, but I will apologize right up for not being here all week. Part of the side effects of the government shutdowns and other things, I work for the Navy, so I'm not allowed to travel to conferences very much without very senior approval. It doesn't require President Obama's approval yet, but it's getting up there, and that may occur. But I'm very glad to make the flyby at least, make the contact, support Marius, Jerry Kim, in this group. It's important work, and I hope you find it interesting. I started with the bottom line slide. We'll go back up front. We'll come back to this slide with the details, but that's there are several ways to get involved in the context here, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go to the best of my ability. So let's go back to the beginning. The phone may ring during this. Marius is still hard at work back in Paris, and they call us. So what is this reference model about? Well, of course, as you all well know, augmented reality is a challenging topic. It cuts across many subject areas, but fundamentally, it's people directly engaged in the world with computer-aided mediation, perception, annotation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this group is trying to tackle that, and the group went through the traditional, what's our name again? At least for the AR community, at least 3 revolutions. I think the last orbit was probably the final successful one, spanning the range from physical reality to virtual reality, where it could be mixed, it could be augmented, the spectrum of what's there. And I'm sure, Christine, is it safe to say this group is well aware of that, those ranges of trade-offs?
Yes, it's safe to say.
So good news. They're trying to do a reference model, and they're trying to properly span the possibilities rather than focusing on a niche, which may be confounded by the diversity of the space. So the next slide shows how the pieces, parts are being assembled, and I can state confidently that these are not locked down. There are multiple ideas still being correlated. Many of the inputs in this group over time have been very constructive, very helpful. If it were an easy problem, it would have been solved some time ago. So reconciling differences is part of what the reference model is trying to do. Not to tell everybody what to do, but rather to say, can we clearly define a common ground, a shared space for various technologies could all be doing what they're good at, yet be coherent in how content is prepared, how users engage, etc. So I'm not quite sure how Marius presents this one, but it's almost any slide in this space can clutter to the point of no white space left as you go. There are many players, there are many technologies. How do we work together? What are the roles of the different people? This is what part of the challenge that the reference model activity is trying to address. Okay, here's another wiring diagram that shows how these work. Now the arrows in here, typically the PowerPoint meaning of an arrow is in the order of, and then a miracle occurs, or the author has something in mind that may be quite different from everybody else. this is the PowerPoint. The reference document itself, it tends to be fairly detailed, and we are trying to clearly list, describe, categorize these relationships of how they all work together in ways that everybody could say, for example, everybody in this room might say, well, we wouldn't describe it exactly like that, but we get what you're saying, we can map to it, we could find common ground here. Okay, so that's the challenge. If the diagrams get cluttered, well, the lists of technologies, inputs, outputs, cross-connects, again, stretches in almost every direction. Maybe that's okay, because the more you do this, the more patterns you see emerge. Common idioms, common ways of doing business, common ways of putting things together, and it is such a rich space. That's probably okay. One issue that has not been a problem, I don't think, in this work is lack of clarity of good examples. It's almost like art. You know, when you see good art, AR, you know it. And we're trying to find that common space. So how do you get there? Well, here's another eye of the beholder's chart that could mean any degree of wonderfulness you want, but a strict paying attention to vocabulary and the reference terms is part of this. And again, not to exclude anybody, but rather to capture the core concepts, because often it seems you can pick a number of papers or a number of concepts and say, oh, these look very similar, and then you drill down and terms are not being used consistently, there's overlap, there's occasional conflict. We're trying to deconflict those and get these straight. All myself. So use cases. This is another very important way to deconflict, to rather than say, well, we'll have some fill in the blank computer science result. You can instead say, how does the user interact with this? What are the outcomes? What occurs? And if we can define those well, people usually agree pretty quickly when you get a use case, right? And then we can not only ripple backwards to make sure the technology is aligning to support in a coherent way, but have success metrics. What did we get there? Do we support the use case? So having finish lines, in this case 6, of how would we measure or express local versus remote, I think is really valuable. They further split it out in terms of points of interest. This is curious and powerful and hopefully obvious if we got it right. Author content, very well POIs, but also server mediated, perhaps externally inserted or externally offered POIs. There's some interesting distinctions here. AR is nothing if not including video and a situated device. And so the use cases of how people are, at least not exclusively, but commonly applying AR techniques is a helpful way of clarifying this. So let's drill down a little bit. Oh, by the way, audio too, sure. Let's start drilling down into these, and you can get a flavor of how this problem is being organized. The notion of a browser within the device, that it's, if not web-oriented, at least web-compatible, and content that could play in a variety of directions. You see, we also have the idea of data capture, content authors, merging of how it can work. So the scene that's just being interacted with locally, how do you register? What are the variations on that thing? Pretty much a building block approach. These are simplified conceptual diagrams of what we're trying to get more detailed inside, but not so detailed that it's telling you how you do business, but rather capturing as a reference model how it works. I've seen many variations of these diagrams. What helps us refine them is each time we contrast it to another technology and see what works, what doesn't. Are we still in the same playing field? Okay, here's yet a further refinement for remote detection and location. And I can't speak for the group, but I can say for our lab, when we go through these kinds of naming and design exercises to get it through, you know you have the right name, you know you have the right result, and nobody asks about it anymore. Because they just go, oh, okay, yeah, that. And so it's very much a spiral refinement process. So you're looking over the shoulders of the people who are trying to get there.
I have a question, actually.
Please, on that one? Yeah.
Beautiful job of saying, you opened the door, you said, you know you've got it right when nobody asks the question anymore.
Yeah.
Would you back up a bit?
Great.
I remember about, so there was a slide that said POI. It was when you were introducing this set. One more, right there.
Yeah.
Content embedded POIs, server available POIs. Do you know what that means?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Well, is the point of interest metadata on the server, or is it on a local device? And if it's server available, then it's latency, the needs to have interchange formats and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And content embedded, server available, I read that, but what is content embedded?
In the app content, say I've got a mobile phone that's just got some embedded app that only recognizes, say, certain types of voice. Everything's local, no server connectivity necessary, no interchange formats, no JSON docs, none of that.
I thought, so what would be more parallel for me would be server available POI or local available POI. That would be more, especially would be keeping in line with the structure of remote versus mobile. So the whole structure, this architecture you described has got remote, local, remote, local.
Unless you think of the content as media, right? It is augmented reality media form that can be embedded on a device, and that might be the reason we call it content, because it's media association rather than server.
So this was a perfect vignette of the types of discussions that go on in the spiritual book on email, and we get to them face to face. And we might characterize the different things you guys said as, let's say, network or system oriented versus user or offer oriented. And sometimes those divisions or overlaps are hard to discern. And that's what I think we should put this all the way back to, well, what's the use case again? How do we measure success? And so testing it every time, the question is exactly like you posed, Christine. You go, wait a minute, is it really this or is it really that? You're illustrating the process that at least I perceive this group going. It is not a Highlander strategy. It is not a survival of the fittest contest. We're putting things together. And
I love these charts because I don't want to ever have to make these charts when you're done. Can you get these?
I'm sorry?
I love these charts. These are
Yeah, it's all good.
Did you? How are we doing on time? Should we move on?
You should go continue, please.
Okay, so here are those two. Let's see if we can discern a little more about contrasting these two. I tend to think of this one as similar to when you're interacting with a map application. I created a few place marks in preparation for my journey today, and so I have those embedded in my content, yet my device is also saying, oh, you may be also interested in things I'm not interested in. I was interested in the parking lot, finding that it didn't prompt me. But that's a choice that might be up to the user. It might be up to the content designer. It might say, oh, no, if you're doing this, you don't need these other distractions. It might be an option that the user superimposes. So there's the flavor where it's currently landed. There's the contrast of that. And of course, there will be questions that remain unanswered, such as, well, who keeps all these server-mediated things? I'd expect that to be primarily system-specific, but there may be shared conventions among different systems that have that. For example, if we're putting AR markers out there, does it make sense for each system to have its own, for all systems to share the same marker conventions, or perhaps a mix? Okay, so these are the balances that are quite interesting. Marius, if you run the line, I would be happy to have you drill down into some of the details on this.
I already did this on this channel in this meeting.
Okay.
And he gave me, now I understand why the discrepancy, because as a way of content embedded points of interest, he gave me the example of a RAF, which is the in-play augmented reality application format. And now we understand why he wanted to introduce and make sure it's covered and included in the reference model, but it's not something that is, shall I say, part of most architectures of augmented reality today. The AR application format, I think that has this concept of everything, the player and the content and everything being in a single wrapper, a single functional file. Okay, I'm sorry.
Cheers. No.
So that's
That's fine.
the,
So there are a variety of camera options, trying to capture those too. And when is perhaps less functionality needed for use cases? What can we define that consistently? Okay, so these slides will be made available. Christine, I augmented this last night from Marius, who had his original. I'll do the rest here. So back to the bottom line slide. It's taken some time. It's a complex topic. There's no need to rush to the wrong answer, but there's great value in getting to a useful answer. That's where the group's at. It is a joint effort between SC24, Working Group 9, and SC29, Working Group 11. The meetings are open. Membership, I don't know all the details, but you can. There's several paths to ISO. One of them is, of course, OGC. Web3D Consortium is another. National bodies are perhaps the most important. And if all of those options remain insufficient, or your own organization may have a relationship, I'm sure that Marius and Jerry Kim, the co-conveners here, can put that together. Intellectual property rights, the question was asked earlier, extremely important. And in fact, Web3D had to remain at arm's length for quite some time until this was reconciled. Web3D's bylaws, we not only will not put royalty-bearing technology into a web standard, but we will not put a working group in a vulnerable position of working for years to have it possibly yanked away. So, as a use case, our consortium requires prior declaration. ISO has 2 tracks. OGC has 2 tracks. For royalty-free versus reasonable and non-discriminatory. This group has chosen the ISO royalty-free track, which does not strictly require prior declaration, but does ask for declaration at the beginning of each meeting. And at least our understanding, and I think the understanding of the group is, it would be unlikely for I don't know if you knew this, Christine, I'm a former submarine guy, so submarine patent that is hiding forever and pops up at the last minute. Oh, we worked for several years, and then somebody says, but of course it will be a penny per click. It's unlikely, I'm told, at these meetings that ISO would approve a component of that in a standard that is advanced under the ISO royalty-free policy. Finish line, Web3D was able to say, the board of directors said, okay, this is sufficiently compatible with our bylaws that we are able to participate. We've been to a grand total of 1 full meeting after 10 half meetings. And we're happy with how it's progressing. It is a hard problem. There are fantastic people involved on it, and they're nothing if not patient. If I can follow up on anything, I'm happy to do so. Our X3D standard is listed here. The X is extensible. We do intend to implement it. And we are tying this conceptually and as part of our activities to our X3DOM and X3D4O efforts. there's a great deal of overlap. This group is also aware that many W3C members are quite active in the AR, and probably some of them are in the room, maybe I don't know. So Dunley and Tino and Belkay are co-chairs, with that we have committed to implement the AR mixed augmented reality reference model as part of X340 in concert with HTML5 S3.0. So we're trying to walk the walk to make sure this so-called abstract document is implementable a second time, evaluate, test. That's my group's commitment to this group. And there you go. Questions, please.
Yes, Eric.
So, MPEG has included lossy animation stream codecs in the past, and bandwidth conservation is extremely important because everything's wireless, but you didn't talk about that in the presentation. Is that stuff, or some version of it still in this version of the standard?
What has been asserted in the meeting minutes is that there are no royalty-bearing technologies from MPEG within here. We have asked similar questions. There's this 30-page document that has patent after patent listed one line for are any of those involved. The assertion from MPEG 29 participants, which I'm not a member of, I'm relaying, is that there are no royalty-bearing patents involved in any of their contributions to the mixed augmented reality model. That is the first question now on the agenda for each meeting that occurs from now on. Do all contributions adhere to that policy? The tricky part is it costs money to do patent searches, so we try not to trigger that, or at least ISO's trying not to. But that is the response we're getting. My treaty is proceeding in good faith. We're happy to be part of a group effort.
So there's no compression?
No compression, no. This is a conceptual model.
Okay.
So it doesn't go down at the technology level and make a recommendation or any implementation-specific language is not in scope.
And by the way, all the stuff that was in MPEG 4 version 1 is now over 17 years old.
Soon to expire.
It's already expired.
It's already expired. Very good. Thank you, Don. That was helpful. Any other questions before we wrap up and head to lunch? I think this represents